The sense that I try to instill in two materials is beyond all rules of composition, and their tangibility, smell, and acoustic qualities are merely elements of the language that we are obliged to use. Sense emerges when I succeed in bringing out the specific meanings of certain materials in my building, meanings that can only be perceived in just this way in this one building. Peter Zumthor. Materials, when used and designed intentionally, can evoke emotion and transform architecture into an experience. In this video, we focus on one specific material, concrete. In order to gain deeper understanding of concrete, how it's formed, advantages and disadvantages of use, and the emotion behind the material, I interviewed architects, designers, and general contractors who have extensive knowledge and experience working with concrete designs. Jason Fowler started his architecture career in Seattle, Washington, where he worked with several different firms before starting his own, with a focus on high-end residential design. He then moved to Mesa, Arizona, and is now a project manager at EMC Architects.
So in the past, what we've done, there's, of course, two kinds of concrete that I really kind of have dealt with. There's the tilt-up kind, where you form it on the ground, you cast it on the ground, you put all the tensioning, whatever you need to into it, and then you put some pick points onto it and you tilt it up, and that's how you make the walls. And we would do that with warehouses, big huge buildings that needed a lot of inexpensive concrete put up quickly, but wasn't necessarily going to be shown. You'd usually put something on the outside to kind of give it a different texture. So there's the tilt-up kind, and then there's the cast-in-place kind, where you have to use slip forms and things. Well, slip forms for like our elevator cores and things. You'd have a form that would be as big as the main floor, and you would pour that concrete, and then you'd slip it up, 8-10 feet or whatever, and pour another set. Slip it up, pour another set. Because it was so rainy over there, we did find that concrete had to be sealed all the time. Not just even the one time. You have to seal it regularly because it does just act like a sponge. In fact, a lot of people think that it's really good for keeping water out, and it's not. It actually pulls water in. It loves to pull water in. And so that's why anything that's under the grade, under the ground, has to have some sort of a bituminous or a rubbery kind of a stuff painted on it in order to keep the water out, because usually groundwater wants to go right in. Here we don't have as much problem because we really don't freeze that much. We have what's called expansive soils in this area where if you even get a little bit wet, it expands and it turns into, kind of like big fluffy stuff. And so that's why a lot of times we try to keep our trees and our sprinklers and everything away from the buildings by at least 6 to 8 feet, so that you don't get any water going underneath your foundation, because it'll lift your whole building. It'll move things around. They tend to be a little bit different pour. You'd want to make sure on the building that you had a lot less aggregate, so you didn't show off a whole bunch of stuff. And they call it slump too, where when you're doing concrete work, you have a certain amount of water to a certain amount of there's a lot to concrete. There's cement, aggregate, and some other things that can help it either cure faster or not. And so when you've got something inside of a wall, you don't want it to slump too quickly and try to blow out the bottoms of your forms. So at the top of the form is very little pressure because it's just got a little bit of concrete, right? But as you get further and further to the bottom of the form, there's this desire for it to kick out. And so what you do is you try to have it not have too much slump. It kind of holds its own form once you put it on, inside the formworks. It'll stop itself from trying to slump outward. Whereas with stuff that you put on the ground, you don't have to worry so much because you've got little form boards like 2x6s or whatever that are keeping it from going where you don't want it to go. But it's very little push out, kick out. So there's a great fear. The taller your walls get, the more kick you're going to have at the bottom of that wall. So you have to be kind of careful of that. So we would introduce maybe a little bit more material, a little less water, so that there was a lot more slump.
Right.
Good question. Good. Actually, Frank Ching, the book that I've got here, he was one of my professors. They would call it primary, secondary, and tertiary, where things needed to look like they would hold up other things. Otherwise, you'd start to get this feeling when someone's looking at the structure. They would look at it and they would say, that can't hang out like that. There's something wrong. My brain can't handle it. And some architects love to do that. They love to create a little bit of I don't know, fear or or concern or whatever. And they love to hang things out over nothing and make you go, wow, how is that doing that? And that is one type of architecture. But this one that Frank would often talk about is more of a letting people, see that yeah, this bigger thing is holding up this smaller thing, which is holding up this smaller thing, primary, secondary, tertiary.
Right.
And we spent whole studios at UW going through, building things to look just like that, and all of our drawings and our designs and our models were pretty much made that way.
Lastly, we turn to Ethan Wessel, co-founder of Tinnen Studios, which he runs with his wife, Sarah Wessel. Together, they have designed many high-end residential homes, many of which use the same materials in new, creative ways. Ethan mentioned that he typically likes to choose from the same palette of concrete, metals, and stone, which often blend well into the Arizona Valley environments. Wessel highlights the idea that there is much beauty to be found in pragmatics, not only as it just the emotions that are naturally evoked by the presence of the concrete, but also the way it is put together and ergonomically designed. For example, he explained the difference of board form versus aluminum form concrete. The time and labor spent on the repeated forms of the 2x creates a beautiful line texture in the concrete. I was able to visit a house that Wessel designed and had this line texture concrete wall. Set parallel to the entrance, it radiates a playful invitation and creates a subtle difference from the smooth cast-in-place walls around it, and the texture is used to draw users into the foyer. Through my interviews with these two architects, as well as architects from Chen Suchart Studio, I learned that architects are not called to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we have the opportunity to take a material like concrete and exploit its natural properties, using simple but powerful moves that use the fluidity of concrete to the design's advantage. The world of concrete is much more expansive than I first understood it to be, uses ranging from designing a procession along the ground, accents in buildings, sloping roofs and running walls, and even monolithic structures. Every move is made purposefully, creating an architectural language that communicates to the user a certain experience of the space. When used with intent as well as practicality, materials help realize extraordinary spaces.